Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next Airspeed's Avatar Rewatch video. This one's going to be for episode 5 of Book 1 Water, the King of Omashu. Another DR movie animated episode. I don't think I commented on the animation in the last one, and the only real point I wanted to make about the Warriors of Kyoshi and its animation is that is a JM animation animated episode, and it probably has one of the most clear moments of just like, what on earth were they doing with the animation, with obviously that scene where Aang does the crazy run away from the Unagi. I think that's a scene that everyone points out as being like, what were they going for with the style there? Whereas this, even though it's done by what is technically the secondary animation studio, the one that's not as good, is not meant to be as good as JM Animation, this is a really solidly animated episode. There's some really cool stuff as they have to do obviously the initial stuff for Omashu, a lot of action on the posted system shoots and so on. You get a proper, bending fight towards the end. Just an overall very solid episode in terms of the animation, and you maybe wouldn't expect that given what studio's doing it. But jumping straight into this episode, I think it's a really good one, another really good episode that continues the excellent start to the series. I don't think there's really been any obvious drop in quality in terms of episodes. This one obviously is probably the least, I suppose, character plot important episode as such, in that you have the first initial two, which are important because of the intro. Episode 3 is really important because there's amazing Zuko stuff, introduction of Zhao, so the Aang at the Southern Air Temple, very important. Sokka and Suki in the last episode, very important. Here it's like, okay, Bumi later in the episode revealed to be quite important to Aang, but for the most part just a very funny, one of the funniest I think episodes of the series overall here, just with how clever the writing is, with the dialogue, and just the characters that they introduce here. Like, you get Aang going undercover as Bonzu Pippin-Padalopsicopoulos III, the introduction of the cabbage merchant here. King Bumi, of course, is just consistently an amazing character, just with how unique his personality is, and just the amount of amazing lines from him, throw them a feast, Kangaroo Island, I hear it's pretty hopping there. The whole discussion with him and the guard about the chamber, and coming to the conclusion that this will send them to the refurbished chamber that was once bad, and even just the little things like he just appears before Aang the next day and is just like, important question, how do you feel about my new robes? And he's just like, what? So really, really fun stuff from King Bumi, and I think that this is one of the strengths, but also in a way kind of stretched over so many episodes, kind of one of the weaknesses of Book 1. Cool that they introduce so many new characters, and that basically every episode almost introduces a new character, a new place, and expands the world, but it's also like, it's very dependent on the quality of that character, the quality of that place, in that we'll get to an episode in, a couple of episodes time where everyone obviously points out the fact that it's a similar structure to this episode, but doesn't accomplish it as well, because Bumi, excellent character with how they introduce him here, with how important he is, the connection to Aang in the past, and then just his overall, the way they write him as a character being very humorous and funny, but also in the end, ultimately, he was kind of ahead of everyone, testing Aang. Just really well done. And I like how they use the flashback here. They kind of use the fact that, like, most of what's happening here in the early part of Book 1 is Aang going to visit places that he obviously hasn't been to in a long while, but he has been to before because he is a nomad. So he's returning to Omashu, which is a place where he used to have this old friend Bumi, and he's coming here to ride the postage system, which he used to do with Bumi in the past, because Bumi was the one who in the past came up with this whole idea of using the crazy postage system as basically a kind of slide, super slide. They end up getting captured, and the whole time it's so interesting how they do the whole idea of, the king never actually reveals his name to Aang. And if you're really paying attention, you can maybe make the connection that, oh, the kid from Aang's past is the kid now, it is the king now, but it's something you're not really thinking about, because it's been 100 years, and for the most part the idea of anyone living to be over 100 is something that not a lot of people can really think is pretty, like, something to really keep in mind. because Bumi is one of the few characters who ultimately we know live to be over 100, and even to this point in time where we are in like the comics now, everyone's almost kind of wondering like how do they approach Bumi as a character and where he goes from here, in that he is the last remaining basically person in Aang's life who's from Aang's like original life, who knows Aang from when like he was like just 12, not 112, with the in ice period. He's one of the only characters who knows Aang from 100 years ago, and that makes him a very important character. And I think in the comics, if they ever decide to do like the death of Bumi, that should be a very like important moment in terms of, I suppose, the era in the world of just like one of the last people who's still alive from the like pre-war generation. Like technically, like it is Aang, Guru Patik, and King Bumi who are like the only people in the world left who basically know what the world is like prior to the 100-Year War. So the death of Bumi, because Patik is a bit of a like enigma in a way, would be this huge like era shift of just like losing someone like that, and for Aang it would mark this kind of idea of this kind of transition point for him of just everyone from his past life kind of being gone. So I'd hope if they ever get to doing something like that in the comics, that they make, if they ever decide to kill off Bumi, a really interesting thing, because knowing that Kyoshi lived to be 230, Bumi almost seems like the only character who could get anywhere near that in terms of age. So that's kind of funny that like episode 4 and 5 introduce us to characters who are like established to live to be over 100, Kyoshi over 200. So some interesting stuff here for sure. We're also introduced to the cabbage merchant here for the first time, which is very interesting. Again, primarily just a gag in this episode that they use a few times, that just they arrive in the city, his cabbages are thrown away because they're like infected. He later appears with good cabbages, but Aang and co run into them, and it's interesting that they do bring him back later on, primarily for the gag once again, of just he ends up encountering Team Avatar over the course of his travels, and basically ends up being this amazing source for the gang's journey in terms of the Ember Island players later on. But then in the comics and then into Korra, they actually give him a much more important role as like someone who really embraces like higher technology once it starts to become more prevalent in the world, to the point where Cabbage Corp is one of the bigger kind of industrial kind of companies in the world in the time of Korra. It is more like the kind of mass manufacturer, whereas like Future Industries is kind of known for like really inventing all new stuff, high end. Cabbage Corp is kind of more known for cheaper stuff, easier to produce, and so on. So interesting idea just for the character in terms of where they go with him beyond just the joke of who he is. But yeah, the core of Aang's interaction with Bumi before he knows it's Bumi is just that the king basically is just acting so odd around the team. It's clear that he is aware of who Aang is initially, because you see him see Aang for the first time and he's just kind of like, oh, but then immediately puts on the whole like the whole act and stuff like that, acting the way he does, and the idea is just 3 deadly challenges. But before that, an interesting thing I noted was just Bumi figures out that Aang is an airbender by throwing the like chicken drumstick at him and forcing Aang to airbend. It's interesting that Aang's son Bumi in Korra, when he learns to airbend, how he reveals it to basically everyone else is Milo throwing a plate at Bumi, and Bumi basically doing the exact same move to show that he's an airbender. I don't know if that's an obvious connection that they were going for, of just the idea of like original Bumi threw something at Aang, and then Bumi 2 is an airbender and does the same move to get discovered as an airbender. Just an interesting little connection with the whole Bumi name, which again, like going back a little bit to the Bumi talk, I think very clearly one of the reasons why Aang probably called his first child that was a son, his first child, Bumi is probably due to the idea of Bumi being the last person from his like original life still left alive, and it being maybe some sort of a in honor of thing. Because again, we don't know how long Bumi lives. I think most people are almost assuming that he'll pass away soon, but I feel he could be one of those characters to live on a good bit longer. So, if just the idea of like by the time like Bumi maybe passes away just before Aang and Katara have their first child, that could be a perfect situation for why Aang names his first child Bumi. Yeah, from there we go on to, where am I going? Oh yeah, the challenges. The first one is pretty simple. It's just Ki hanging in the middle of a waterfall. How does Aang accomplish this? Just some fun action stuff as he tries to just blast his way into it, and he ends up having to like throw one of the pointy rocks through the Ki to basically hang it up against the wall, and he can apply enough energy to it to get it through. The second one's very simple, of just, like, here's a small rabbit-like thing, here's a giant gorilla goat, which one's Flopsy? And Aang initially thinks it's the small one, when in fact it's actually the big one, and it ends up liking Aang a lot, and that's Flopsy. Very unique animal, I will say. One thing I suppose Korra did is that it didn't really introduce us to a lot of new, like completely brand new, crazy, like new animals. Whereas like the gorilla goat here, I think is one of the more unique animals that we see. And then the last challenge is the one-on-one fight. Again, really clever what Bumi does here is just he stands there in the middle of the guys that he's giving Aang the option of fighting. And Aang thinks he's going to have an easy fight by choosing the king, but the reveal is that Bumi is actually one of the most powerful earthbenders Aang will ever meet, and we get a really cool fight. Now, it ends up being this weird fight where Bumi was never really going to go, like, I think, full on 100% against Aang, but I don't think you can just completely dismiss how powerful Bumi, like, how powerful Aang is going up against Bumi here. In that, yes, I don't think Bumi was maybe going 100% against Aang, or maybe Bumi could have finished the fight if he was really going for the kill much earlier on. But I think, Bumi is probably going, like 90% against Aang here, because I do think this fight is meant to highlight that Aang is actually really, really skilled, that he can, for the most part, hold his own reasonably well up against an incredible earthbending master here, who realistically is number 2 in terms of all the earthbenders that we know. But you could definitely make a case for just Bumi's raw experience and just sheer power being slightly more powerful than what we see of Toph, who hasn't yet reached her prime. So, this is like against the basically number 1 or number 2 earthbender in the entire world. Aang doing this well at such a young age is very, very impressive. And the fight is really, really good as well. Just it's very much, speed and agility versus just, power, strength. And it's just amazing to see how powerful Bumi is, just being able to do a lot of very delicate earthbending moves with just the walk thing that he does to make Aang dodge everything, and then the huge power attacks that he can also do. Which, with earthbenders, we don't often see earthbenders go for the crazy big chunks of earth, and it speaks to how powerful Bumi is, that he can, chuck around rocks that are that big. And then even when they're hurled back at him, that he's able to dodge against them by just kind of burrowing through them. It speaks to how powerful he is, but I still think there's a level of Bumi holding back to a degree in this fight, to the point where you can't exactly judge his power level here. In that, he is definitely established to be one of the most powerful benders that we see in the show. Aang gets, the technical win here, and that Bumi kind of just gives it to him when he gets up close enough and could have done a big strike against him. But Bumi more or less had him covered off with a rock in front of him. The idea of like, I'll give you the fight here, but realistically it's a draw, or I get the win because I'm holding a rock of both of us. But Bumi just wanted to test Aang here. Then the end reveal is, of course, that the king is in fact Bumi, Aang's old friend, and it being this like huge reveal of just like, oh, you're still alive, and it being this big connection that Aang at least has one person left from his old life who's still alive. But there's such a difference between them, because here's this 112-year-old man who like physically looks it, versus Aang, who is the same age technically, but is actually only 12 years old. So really fun interaction that, like, because Bumi is such an oddball character, it's such a fitting friendship for him to have. But the big reveal at the end is, of course, that Bumi confirms to Aang that one of the things he's going to need to do, in addition to mastering the elements, is that he's going to have to defeat the Fire Lord, the head of the Fire Nation, whose name is Ozai. So this is the first time we get that. One thing I would question about this episode is Bumi probably should be aware of the comet to a degree. And I'm surprised that he doesn't really allude to the comet all that much, or give Aang an idea of just like, maybe you should try and accelerate your plans a little bit. Because, again, technically Bumi was there, he's the same age as Aang, basically. So, Bumi was alive when the first comet hit, and the first attack from the Fire Nation came. Now, because he's from the Earth Kingdom, maybe he's not aware of the whole history of the comet, that it comes every 100 years, and what it does to firebenders. But to some degree, given that he's a member of the Order of the White Lotus, you'd think that maybe he would be one of those characters who is aware of the comet and could have told Aang. Now, of course, equally, he could just be assuming that, like, okay, you haven't communicated with any of your past lives yet. I'll leave it to when you do that to get this reveal. But it feels like Bumi, and how, like, old he is, how ultimately involved in this secret organization which has so much information, he probably should know this. It's a little weird. Again, I think I just put that down to, we're only 5 episodes in. The idea of the Order of the White Lotus probably hasn't been put in place at this point, because I think if they had had that idea from the start, they probably at some point in this episode would have had a White Lotus tile at some point appear in relation to Bumi at some point. But they don't. So, nothing to be too critical of, I don't think. But ultimately, just a little thing they probably would have changed differently if they could write this episode again. But overall, such a funny episode, well written. Ultimately, character-wise, not the most important in that. Like, Aang, does he really develop in this episode? Okay, learning some more Bumi tactics, I suppose, to add to his fighting style is fine. But, it's not an important episode as such. Like, even the whole Ozai reveal at the end is like, it's just Bumi giving him the name of the guy he has to defeat in the end. They haven't fully committed to, and you have to do it before the end of summer. So that's the only, I suppose, weakness of this episode, is that it is the first episode that is kind of just, we're visiting a place, we're here, kind of important character, and we move on. And it kind of begins a trend in the series that we'll get into as we go through it. So, that has been the review for 105, The King of Omashu. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on this episode. But, the plan is to do at least one more of these videos this week. Probably tomorrow I'll do 106, Imprisoned. So look out for that video. But, that has been the video for today. Thanks for watching, and bye.